it sure is nice to come home at the end of a long day and enjoy a podcast. But you know what makes the experience that much better? Relaxing with a few puffs of smoke from my McQueen pipe. At McQueenPipes.com, I was able to find the perfect smoking pipe to suit my nerdy, yet dignified sensibilities. I especially love that each pipe is designed and handcrafted by a true artisan, and that all of their pipes are inspired by fantasy books and movies like The Lord of the Rings. Being a bit of a hobbit myself, my pipe is called the Barrel Rider, but they've also got pipes for wizards, rangers, dragon riders, or even goblins. If pipe tobacco isn't your thing, no worries. McQueen Pipes has got you covered with attachments for vaping or even cannabis. Head on over to McQueenPipes.com and use the code BIOGRAPHERS at checkout to receive 15% off of your entire order. Go ahead, treat your nerdy heart to something you'll cherish and enjoy your podcast listening experience in style with a McQueen pipe. That's Mac like mac and cheese and Queen like the band. McQueenPipes.com and use the code BIOGRAPHERS at checkout for a 15% discount on your whole order. Cheers, everyone, and happy podcasting.
I do hope you can see me today from where you are.
Ich bin ein Lehrling.
If I'm generally anything, I guess I'm generally miserable. This modern world of science and invention is of particular interest to women.
The people, I would say, there is no patent. Would you patent the sun?
I regard myself as a soldier, though a soldier of peace.
Welcome to the Biographers.
The more that I watch it, the more that I'm like, yeah, it doesn't end great or whatever, but throughout the series, it's pretty damn awesome, and it's really interesting to see his kind of interpretation on different cultures and what they represent in the Game of Thrones universe, right? So it's pretty clear that Westeros is the UK, right? Down in London, King's Landing, and then up in the north, you got the Scottish, who are kind of their own thing, and they're doing their own thing away from the English crown, and they're not, they don't identify with it, but they're technically a part of the same kingdom, even though they're reluctant to be it, and there's been wars in the past. It's like, it's so clear. And then you go down to like the Dornish, and they're in this more like southern tropical setting, and they're making great wine, and it's like, you're kind of French with this splash of Spanish.
Yes.
You know what I mean? That's like
French Spaniard type of thing.
Exactly.
And I still, the hardest one for me is figuring out where is Italy, because I could say it's either the Iron Bank with Florence, or I could say it's House Lannister as well.
I could see that too.
I would actually put House Lannister more in Milan, which we'll get into a little bit today.
Okay.
Which there are still parallels on both sides. Maybe, what's the name of the house with the flower?
Tyrell.
Yes, House Tyrell.
Growing strong.
I would say is Florence, and then Milan could be Lannister, but we'll see.
Ooh, I could see that, or even like Naples or something like that, where there's a lot of wealth and everything.
Milan is...
Or even Rome, to be honest with you. That makes sense to me if the Lannisters were Rome.
Yeah, true.
Because they're
different
super
time
wealthy,
period, but yeah.
super powerful, I mean, and I think George R.R. Martin plays with that, right? Is that he's not looking at some single point in history.
Yeah,
he's looking
it shouldn't
at
be a one-to-one ratio
right?
at all.
It's sort of like, oh, they're kind of the this people, they're kind of the that people, but that, and then you go across the narrow sea or whatever, you get to the Dothraki, and it's like, well, they're pretty clearly like the Saudis.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They're this sort of nomadic people. They're moving around.
Assyrian.
They're very closely associated with horses and stuff like that, which they were.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think it's all pretty fascinating. But hey, everybody, welcome to the Biographers. I'm Daniel Newman. With me is Akiva Miola.
Hello.
Whose last name I just learned in the last episode is Italian.
Yeah.
I did not know that. And if you guys listened through to the very end of the last episode, he gave us a lovely little breakdown on all of his heritage, which I was also not fully aware of either. There's a lot
to be fair.
there. You're a child of the world, and I like
am.
that.
I guess I am. We'll see.
But yeah, thanks everybody for joining. We're about to get started into Leonardo da Vinci Part 2, and I'm sure you're going to give us a little rundown of where we were at last time.
Yeah, so we left off last week with Leonardo having proven his mettle at 20 years old with an otherworldly angel in Verrocchio's Baptism of Christ, a painting so good that Master Verrocchio would never pick up a brush again. Aside from that, Leonardo had made his mark helping design cathedral ornaments and inventions that dreamed of flight. Now, having earned the credentials to call himself a master painter, Da Vinci would play it safe by staying in his old master's workshop for a few years as a paid man.
Okay. So he's officially a paid artist at this point.
Yes.
I think we said last time the student becomes the master.
Yeah, pretty much. They ended up still staying friends. He's still going to work in the bottega for a little while. You know, Leonardo would spend this time savoring his new freedom. He had been an apprentice making close to nothing at this workshop since he was 13 years old, and now he finally had the autonomy that he wished for. Almost immediately after graduating, Leonardo would take a vacation back to Vinci to visit his mom and his stepdad. The vacation out of the cutthroat city was really refreshing for him, with him writing, "I am truly happy here with the Catabriga, troublemaker."
Oh, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
Catabriga.
Yes.
It's
it's such a good... that's honestly why I put the quote in there, because it's not really that relevant, but I like saying a Catabriga.
It's like Will Ferrell and Elf, where he's like, ooh, Francisco. That's a fun word to say, Francisco. And he just walks around.
Yeah, so the fresh perspective gave Leonardo some time to appreciate the natural world again, which he would continue to sketch the flora and fauna around him during his little vacation. And during his time off, Leonardo would hike up and sit on top of a hill with a pen and paper, and he would sketch the view around him. Taking in the fresh air, Da Vinci playfully drew the rolling Tuscan countryside. No person or animal to record their likeness, no customer to complain for adjustments, just him and the view. In that little 3-week getaway, Leonardo would unknowingly draw the first landscape art in European history, the Arno Valley landscape.
Wow.
What I think is so interesting about the Arno Valley landscape, we won't get into it too much, is the fact that what made it special was that there was actually no subject. And I feel like in a lot of other cultures and regions, landscape paintings and drawings were really popular, but in European history, this was one of the first recorded instances of this.
It's amazing to think that, because when I think about art in general, the first thing that comes to my mind is landscape painting, to the point where it's, to my knowledge, in the 20th century, it became something of a joke amongst artists, where they're like, let me guess, you're a landscape portraitist or whatever.
Yes, exactly.
Where that was just sort of what they did. And I'm curious if you're going to go into this, but I seem to recall in the back of my brain somewhere that Leonardo da Vinci was also the first person, when he painted landscapes, to show the haze of the atmosphere.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll let you get into that.
Yeah, he talks about perspective later on in his life. We don't dive into that too much, but when he talks about perspective for distance, he also talks about visibility and how in very far distances, mountains seem purple, that the air, while it seems see-through in short distances between objects, after an extended period of time does have a color to it, which is something that a lot of people didn't really pay much attention to. Normally, they were just very focused on the subject, and then they'd add some trees in the background.
Sure.
That type of thing. Da Vinci would end up working on more finished paintings now than he ever did so far, painting the animals in a depiction of Tobias and the Angel, along with 2 of his first standalone paintings, which are a set of Madonnas commissioned by Lorenzo de' Medici, using the Medici family to depict Mary and baby Jesus. It's actually from these paintings that we gain a bit of insight on his home life. Leonardo was very sought after for his depictions of infants because he understood natal anatomy really well. This was due to the studies that he would do of his half-brothers at his father's house in Florence.
Oh.
Fun little fact, we can also guess that Leonardo had a family pet, since his sketches of his baby brother often involved a poor kitten trying to escape from his brother's grip.
Well, that's adorable.
Yeah. In all of his notebooks, it's just like a baby hugging this like tabby cat, and the cat's like, please, let me alone. You know, that type of thing. That was kind of cute.
And also, really quickly, the landscape, was that the Arno Valley?
Yes.
So that's the one that I'm seeing here. Also posted on, it's going to be on our website, probably on Instagram as well. So if anyone wants to check out what that looks like, you can find it on thebiographerspodcast.com.
Yeah, I think that one's really interesting. There's a lot of movement in there.
I assumed that it was going to be in color, but it's in that kind of classic Leonardo da Vinci sepia kind of look.
Yeah, so this would be with a silver point stencil, which essentially the paper, I want to say, had like an oxidizing agent on it. And then when the silver brushed up against it, it would darken that area.
Very cool.
I don't know the exact specifics, but that's kind of his traveling kit for the most part. That was one of his preferred mediums for when he was just, like I said, taking a hike, going up to the top of some hill and sketching out what he saw.
Very cool.
All right. Now, not all of Leonardo's paintings were winners. The Madonnas were well received, and the Medici commissioned a painting to keep the church in their favor. This one was supposed to depict a scene where an angel confronts Mary to tell her that she's going to be God's baby mama. And that would be called the Annunciation.
Oh, that's another one of the pictures that you listed as well.
Exactly.
Let me take a look at that as well.
We got a couple right at the beginning.
Oh, yeah. Cool. Gosh, it's so funny looking. I never, this sounds strange to say, but when you see his style, it's so clearly Da Vinci's style. You know, it was very distinct.
Yeah. Despite
being of the same kind of variety of the Renaissance, he very much had his own style of how he liked to do things.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't have been able to tell the difference between Michelangelo or Verrocchio or Botticelli and Leonardo until I actually got into it. And I'm like, oh, this is so obviously Leonardo.
Yeah.
You know, Leonardo used this commission to try out actually a new technique called anamorphism. See, Da Vinci knew that the painting was going to be placed high up and to the side of churchgoers by the entrance. So he used perspective geometry to stretch out the painting in a way where everything is in proportion when you passed it.
Interesting.
It was kind of the cutting edge for paintings of the time. In fact, if you visit an art museum showing paintings like this in a gallery, they'll often actually direct you to stand in a specific spot so you actually get the full view of the optical illusion that you're seeing. Now, Da Vinci's Annunciation didn't exactly do a great job at this. If you look into it a little bit deeper, the trees are kind of out of proportion. And even looking at it from the bottom corner, one of Mary's arms that's reaching out for a book is way longer than the other.
Oh, yeah, you're totally right. It's like a quarter, if not a third longer than the other arm.
Yes. Yeah. Which is really interesting. That being said, I'm not sure if I would have noticed the discrepancy if like an art historian didn't point it out to me.
Sure.
But that one was kind of a flop on his end. Now, on the other side of Da Vinci's mind, something was beginning to grow. A seed had been planted by Verrocchio's geometry studies, and Leonardo's famous observation skills were beginning to blossom. His notebooks began to swirl with geometry and practical invention. Now, having more free time, Leonardo began observing the natural world around him and using what he found in nature to inspire sketches and inventions would start to jot these down. He was particularly interested in water and air, seeing that the movement of both birds and fish were similar, using their bodies to cut through the elements. In his notebooks, he would question how a fish in the ocean could manage greater speeds than a bird in the sky, knowing that the water is thicker. In that same vein, he would draw a bird as it approached for a landing with its wings spreading wide to catch the air in order for it to stop.
Wow.
In his sketches of birds in flight, he wrote, quote, "As it is to move the objects against the motionless air, so it is to move the air against the motionless object." And quote, "The same force as is made by an object against the air is made by the air against an object." Not sure if you caught that. But yes, Leonardo discovered and understood the law of equal and opposite reaction 200 years before Newton would publish his findings.
Holy shit. That's amazing.
Yeah, he just sketched it down. He was like, oh yeah, birds stay in flight because they push down in the air and the air pushes back with the same amount of force.
That is insane.
Not exactly how birds work specifically, but yes, that is a general, well, universal law.
I was going to say, not quite as succinct as the laws of thermodynamics that Newton put out, but it's the same exact principle, it sounds like.
I mean, that's all he needed to know, though. That's the thing. Since this is Leonardo that we're talking about, he just jotted it down as another fact of life and moved on.
That is thermodynamics, isn't it? Isn't that one of the first or second rule of thermodynamics is for
remember.
every action there's
it's
an
just
equal
laws of nature.
Reaction?
That's what I've heard.
Anyway, never mind. We can
but either way, like I said, 200 years before Newton discovered the laws of, physics, this is what Da Vinci is just jotting down in his notebook because he's like, oh, that makes sense, and then move on. Let's go paint. I think that's kind of interesting.
Neat. Let's go paint something.
Now, while it's hard to date any of his inventions, we can guess that around this time is when we see another aerial contraption that he was working on, which is an early invention for the parachute. Unlike the dome or pill-shaped parachute sails that we're used to, Da Vinci would design one that was the shape of a square pyramid, stitched together in triangles of fabric with a thin, light wood to frame the sails. Funny enough, experimental archaeologists would build this in 2000 to Da Vinci's specifications, and it worked.
Oh, so like in the year 2000, people
Yes.
tried this out and it worked?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Leonardo didn't have any chance to test this invention, so I'm sure he'd be pretty excited to know that.
I think he'd be excited to know that any of his inventions worked that he wasn't able to create. Which, there was a show, by the way, years and years and years ago on the Discovery Channel, I want to say, that was called like Building Da Vinci or something like that, where they basically took all of his designs and tried to make them. And almost all of them worked to an extent or another. They had some issues here and there, but they all seemed to work. It was pretty insane.
I think in that show they also did the parachute.
Oh, okay.
So I'm not sure if that was the first iteration of Da Vinci's parachute that was actually tested, but yeah, the parachute did work. There's some issues with it since air likes to sort of build in central locations. Corners don't typically get pressurized in the same way as if you did a perfect dome, but you could parachute down with it with little to no injury. So, which I think is kind of interesting.
There was actually an exhibit at I believe it was the Denver Nature of Art and Science, where they did all these different inventions by Da Vinci. One of which I thought was fascinating was I don't even know how you describe it, something to measure distances. And it was
an odometer.
Is that what it? Okay, I'm thinking of. Yeah, there we go. An odometer. You're much smarter than me. And it was through this wheel system, and it would drop little balls. And anyways, it was fascinating.
He actually used this later on. I didn't add it because it wasn't super relevant to like the grand scheme of things, but he did use this to measure the distance between Florence and Milan when he went to go take a trip.
Whoa.
Yeah, and he was only off by like 2 miles, which is crazy because it's like a 120-mile distance between the two cities.
That's really cool.
Now, despite the minor setback that Leonardo's Annunciation had, word was spreading of his skill as a portrait artist. The Medici were doing what they could to keep the favor of their business partners, and perhaps as a gift, Da Vinci was commissioned for the first secular portrait, a painting of a young Ginevra de' Medici. This is by far my favorite painting from Leonardo's younger years. So I've got a bit of a rhetorical question for the listener. Have you ever been sitting in a public space waiting for a flight or maybe a bus to pick you up when you see a complete stranger that stops you in your tracks? Someone who, when you look at them, you feel like you know who they are and what they've been through. You never have to exchange words, but from a passing glance, you feel sympathy for a nameless person with a life you know was hard-earned. As corny as it sounds, this is immediately how I felt when I got to look at Ginevra's portrait. To describe Leonardo's subject, Ginevra is a late teen girl with dark ginger hair pulled into a bun, curled bangs, and hazel eyes. She has a face that's round and porcelain white like the moon, and her expression appears at first glance to be blank. Like many of Leonardo's paintings, however, context is key. To give a microbio of Ginevra, she was the daughter of the Medici-allied Benci family, and Leonardo probably knew her for quite a while, being friends with her older brother who lent him books to read. Early into her teens, she was set to marry a man twice her age named Luigi Niccolini, who would end up destitute due to poor business decisions. Also, despite her marriage to Luigi, Ginevra also suffered the affections of a 44-year-old Venetian ambassador named Bernardo Bembo, who, despite his wife and mistress, professed his love for her regularly and publicly.
So we got Luigi and Bimbo?
Yeah. Both like full adults vying for this like teenage girl who's, like I said, being a pawn for the Benci family with the Medici. Right?
Hey, my name is Luigi. I love you.
Oh my God. This was supposed to be a serious moment. You know that, right?
I'm so sorry.
How dare you? Now, along with being a pawn vied for by members of the Florentine elite, she also suffered from a chronic illness, never to be discovered or resolved. Ginevra, despite this, made her family proud and handled life's adversity with grace and inner fortitude. She often expressed herself through poetry, and through one of her lines, she writes, "I am a mountain tiger." Knowing this gave me a whole new appreciation for Leonardo's portrait. Maybe instead of a fair, graceful skin tone, we see a pallid complexion due to hidden illness. Maybe instead of sleepy, half-lidded eyes, we see the 1,000-yard stare of a woman who knows her place in the world, and she chooses to find joy when she can, and replaces her disdain for composure. To draw a more modern reference, I see Ginevra in the face of Sophie Turner's depiction of Sansa Stark, someone who, despite their delicate exterior, is a survivor of her circumstances, not a victim. There's something about Da Vinci that gave him the ability to portray women the way that they felt within, not the way that a man saw them. Instead of curvaceous Venus depictions or plainly motherly depictions of the Virgin Mary, he recorded who they were inside in their portraits. Leonardo would become extremely sought after as a portrait artist, particularly by women. Something about his work showed that he related to a woman's silent struggle in a society of masculinity, something that, whether he liked it or not, would be revealed to the world. In April of 1476, an unknown citizen would leave an anonymous tip that would lead to Leonardo da Vinci's arrest and likely a short imprisonment. Apprehended by a morality police group known as the Officers of the Night, Leonardo, along with 4 other men, would be put under investigation for the crime of sodomy.
Ooh.
Mm-hmm. It's at this point in Leonardo's life that Florence would find out that he was a gay man.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Now, I do have to say about this portrait, a lovely interpretation, and I will fully admit that once you said Sansa Stark, I was like, ooh, that's a really accurate comparison. My first gut reaction seeing this portrait was resting bitch face. She looks very upset. She looks very like, if you don't do this for me, I'm going to ask for the manager.
Well, that's the thing is what I find really interesting is like everybody's like, oh, she's so hot. She's the best. She's so nice. And then they saw this portrait and they were like, yeah, there's nothing wrong with her. Let's get her married to this guy. She's got no complaints. I think that's really interesting.
She has the most, I hate to say, dead eyes in this, though. It's very just like, resigned, I think is the emotion that I get from this.
I mean, what else can she be? She has pretty much no legal rights as an individual, no ability to own property. And I think that's what I really liked about Leonardo's portrait of Ginevra. And that's why a lot of female social elites would end up having him paint them, because just like I said, I think maybe perhaps the fact that he was gay, he kind of understood something a little bit more intrinsically about what they were going through, as opposed to being like, that's a hot lady, I'm going to paint her hot.
True.
You know what I'm saying?
True.
Like I said, 1476, he gets arrested, and the allegation was between himself and a 17-year-old apprentice goldsmith named Jacopo Saltarelli. Luckily for Leonardo, the anonymous tip included 3 other boys, one of which was well connected in the Medici clan. According to the law of the time, the person who had made the accusation would have to reveal themselves to the police force to complete the investigation. And since no one was willing to come out in person, the charges were dropped. Oh. Now, status aside, if the group was accused again and someone spoke up, Medici or not, the punishment could be either a prison sentence or execution.
For sodomy?
Yes. Yeah. Now, what's weird about this is allegations of homosexuality were extremely common. Humanist philosophers took many of their teachings from ancient Rome and Greece, which promoted relations between established masters and young apprentices. Also, like today, artist spaces were often a safe haven for queer folks. And with Florence being a city of fine art, it got a reputation for its romantically progressive population. In fact, it was so well known that there were gay men in the city that the German slang for homosexuality at the time was Florenzer.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a Florenzer. That man is a Florenzer. Ha ha ha.
Now, just because Florence was a slightly safer place for gay folks, it didn't mean that it was admired. And as I mentioned before, churchgoers formed coalitions to stomp out gay culture in the city, often seeking the iron fist of the Catholic Church to rid Florence of queer people. The quote-unquote officers of the night were such a group, and once word got out that you were even suspected of such a thing, bad press would surely ensue.
I'm just imagining Dwight Schrute's Knights of the Night. We're Knights of the Night. We protect people at night. Except the opposite. They're hunting gay people, which is no good.
Yeah, I was about to say, I feel like they're not that similar.
No, Dwight wouldn't do that. It's just it's just called the Knights of the Night. That's funny to me.
That's so funny. Okay, so the months following this conviction were really hard on Leonardo. Da Vinci was finally climbing the social ladder in Florence, and while he would continue to work as a painter for the elite, he was outed as a gay man and would face the consequences for that socially. Many of his once friends rejected him, and his lovers would avoid him to protect themselves. In a small blurb in his sketchbook, Leonardo would write, I quote, "As I have told you before, I'm lonely. If there is no love, what then?"
Buddy.
I know.
I want to give him a hug through time.
Right? I feel that way.
Poor guy.
Oof. Now, while the outside world wasn't keen on accepting him, he was actually pretty secure in himself, enough to know that he loved men, and he accepted it. Unlike his queer peers at the time, like Michelangelo or Botticelli, Leonardo would never attempt to hide his inclination by trying to court a woman, and even wrote about straight sex that, quote, the sexual act of coitus and the body parts employed are so repulsive that if it were not for the couple's good looks and pent-up feelings, humans would cease to reproduce.
He was
just like,
he didn't want a beard.
No. He was just like, straight people are gross. He's like, I can't do it. I can't stomach it. Funny enough, he didn't feel that way about the male parts employed, and he would write exploits about them that made me laugh and mostly blush, so I'm not going to share them. But if you go into the notes, there's some funny and pretty raunchy shit. Now, his spirit would eventually recover, and 2 years after the incident with Jacopo Saltarelli, Da Vinci seemed to have a crush on another man, writing, Fioravante di Domenico of Florence is my most beloved friend, as though he were my ... Christian historians would later fill in the ... with brother, which I don't think is exactly what he meant. In fact, Leonardo would find himself in a variety of flings across the art community during this time.
Well, he's a player.
Oh, 100%.
Player's going to play.
Okay. Now, I'm going to jump ahead of the story a bit to mention a not so savory part of Da Vinci's life. In a few years, Gian Giacomo Caprotti da Aureno would become Leonardo's first apprentice at around 10 years old. He was tasked to take care of the house affairs for Leonardo and was his most favorite employee of his house. It's mentioned by a writer who knew one of Da Vinci's students that Gian Giacomo, nicknamed Salai or Little Devil, would end up being Da Vinci's companion when he turned 15, and Leonardo would be around 38.
We were talking about this before we hit record, and how there's a lot of instances in history where in modern times, we obviously are not condoning any of this. Yeah. And we would actually go as far as to condemn it and say this is gross and you're a pedophile and things like that. Mm-hmm. But we were kind of having this conversation around how, and maybe you'll get into this in a moment, how it's hard to judge history in these sorts of ways when society has standards at a time, right?
Yeah. So even considering that 15 was considered an adult age, the fact that he kept him around from such a young age puts the relationship very clearly into the yuck, why is history so gross category. Yeah. Is kind of what I wrote. And, with every person that we've done a biography for so far, it seems that we always run into some ethically dubious thing that requires historical context. So to give Leonardo the benefit of the doubt, there hasn't been a single married person so far in my research of all of Renaissance Italy that has what we would consider an ethical age gap in marriage, whether they were gay or straight. Even Leonardo's father would end up marrying over 20 years his younger. And as much as I would hope that Da Vinci would be more progressive, he would follow the cultural norm with his spouse. Like I said, anywhere in the social elite of Italy, the age gap was like, oh, this is a 40-year-old man and a 15-year-old girl. And yes, Leonardo was progressive, because he was gay, but also being gay isn't necessarily a choice. He was just progressive. He just happened to be progressive because people didn't like gay people. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? It's
like we talked about briefly in the Jack Daniels series, how things like age of consent laws, if they ever even existed in certain countries up until probably the 1900s, usually we're saying, oh yeah, somewhere between about 7 and 10 is when the age of consent laws are going to come into play. And that's when anything prior to that, that's what we're considering is bad. Yeah. Right.
And people will look at that and be like, oh, so are you saying that Da Vinci's not a pedophile? I'm like, no, I'm saying that everyone back then was a pedophile.
Right.
That's kind of the point that I'm making here.
There was also, and we've kind of talked about this too, how things like life expectancy, because they were much lower, just generally speaking throughout history. I think the general consensus from society in most parts of the world, and I'm going to say that loosely, had this attitude of, well, you're about 10. Yeah, you should start looking for a wife.
Yeah. How could that not transfer over to gay culture as well?
Exactly.
If that is the norm.
Right.
It was considered honestly weird for two adult men to be in a relationship. Now, obviously, if the two were kids if one of them was a kid when they first got together, 15, like I said, any younger than that, I think, is a social faux pas, even for them.
Sure.
But they eventually got old together, Salai and Leonardo.
Gotcha.
So now, despite the gross social mores of the time, Salai will continue to be an important figure in the Da Vinci story, so I still think he's worth discussing.
Okay.
As a person, Salai was nicknamed Little Devil pretty unironically. Even before Da Vinci knew him, Salai was known by all as a troublemaker, prone to making scenes. He was known to be histrionic at dinner parties, spilling wine and cursing out people that he didn't like. He was a bit of a thief as well, having stolen from Da Vinci's coin purse to buy fine clothes and sweets, despite his lavish lifestyle and massive wardrobe paid for out of pocket by Leonardo. As far as appearance goes, multiple people from many courts would compliment Solai on his looks, with him having classically beautiful features and golden curly hair, just like Leonardo did when he was a kid. Now, as a result of this, he would end up being Da Vinci's muse in dozens of paintings. Despite this, as the two grew older, Da Vinci would write about Solai's irritating fiascos kind of endearingly, suffering his sassy attitude due to his love for his partner.
I'm thinking James Dean. This is who's coming to mind. It's like a rabble-rouser. He's beautiful, but he's also like, he's a punk. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He doesn't play by the rules. He might steal something every once in a while. He might play, he might have a cheeky run. If you've ever seen Rebel Without a Cause.
I don't think I have.
Oh, man, it's
I
great.
know. Name a movie and I haven't seen it, I promise.
Well, it's basically, long story short, these two guys idiotically drive their cars towards a cliff, and the last person to jump out is the winner.
Oh, okay.
It's the dumbest masculine thing I've ever heard, but anyways.
Yeah, he was a bit like that. Like, just like when he entered the room, you knew drama was about to ensue.
Gotcha.
Now, Solai appears to have a very similar opinion of Leonardo as well. Despite the constant tantrums and thefts, he actually cared for Leonardo, often writing little notes and raunchy drawings in his sketchbook when he wasn't looking. He, in and of himself, was actually an accomplished painter and shared Leonardo's love for theater. If you can somehow remove the immoral age standards of the time, the two kind of remind me of Albert and Armand from Robin Williams' The Birdcage, if you've ever seen that.
A long time ago, but yes.
Okay. They both are just irritating each other to no end, but kind of staying together out of a mutual care for one another, right? Like Leonardo would be like, oh, today Solai stole from my purse. He drives me nuts. And then would continue to have him hired on, would continue to take care of him, that type of thing. And same thing with Solai. Solai would be like, Da Vinci's always telling me what to do. I hate it so much. And then,
but they love each other.
Then they would, make up, and they ended up staying together, well into, Solai's, 30s and 40s. So.
Gotcha.
Now, jumping back to the aftermath of Da Vinci being outed, Leonardo decided that it was time for a change. Whether it was due to him being shunned or because he was a bright-eyed painter who wanted to go out on his own, he began setting up his own studio at 25, leaving Verrocchio's Bottega. He joined a painters guild in town where he did workshops with old masters, including Botticelli, to hone his skills and hustle for work.
Neat.
Now, this ended up being a massive failure for Leonardo. If you haven't noticed, this whole episode's going to be a little bit of a bummer.
Oh, no.
In the 5 years Leonardo went solo, he was only commissioned 3 paintings, 2 of which he never started, and 1 of which he never finished.
Oof.
Yeah, so Leonardo's father managed to get him a job painting a scene for the church depicting 3 wise men visiting Jesus and Mary. It seemed that during Leonardo's depressive stupor, he gained a reputation for not finishing what he started, and his dad and the church knew that very well.
So he learned it from Verrocchio.
Yes, 100%. He was like, not today, I can't. Now, worried about his kid's work ethic, Piero notarized with the monks to create a watertight contract, giving Leonardo 30 months to work on the painting. He had to buy his own paints and was strictly forbidden from getting an advance on his payment.
Ooh.
Yeah. But he had 30 months, so he should be fine.
I was going to say.
The result of this would be The Adoration of the Magi, a painting that is considered by many scholars the greatest unfinished work in Western art.
He still didn't finish it.
No, he had 30 weeks to finish it. He had 30 weeks to finish it, and he still didn't finish it.
It still looks really cool, though. It looks like there's ghosts hanging out with some other people.
To be fair, it was massive, but that still isn't really an excuse because, you're a master painter, right?
Define massive.
Like 10 feet wide.
Okay, yeah, big.
Yeah. Scenes of the 3 wise men were extremely popular at the time. Botticelli, one of Leonardo's peers, had just finished one for the Medici, showing a stately procession of the 3 kings, viewing Jesus as if he were seated in a throne room. While Leonardo would take inspiration from this, his painting was far more dynamic. It portrayed a whole crowd of people in complex, twisting poses with faces of shock, awe, and even love. Instead of painting a group of people so that they looked unified and complete on the frame, every person was moving and expressing themselves as if they were truly unique individuals, like they were the main subject of the painting.
I'm laughing. There's one dude behind Mary, and he's like creeping over, he's like like peeking over, like, ooh, what's this over here? And it's just making me laugh.
Yeah. You can just go through that and just look at every single person. I feel like everybody has their own main character syndrome in this, as opposed to like, everybody turn to the left, there's Jesus, you know.
It is funny. A lot of people feel distressed, it looks like, in the painting, if that makes sense. Even like there's a horse in the background that looks like it's rearing up to an extent. Mm-hmm. I'm like, what is Jesus as a baby doing right now to cause this?
Yeah. It seemed messy, agitated, expressly human in sort of the idea. Leonardo seemed to have realized this new work was incredible, and it's a mystery as to why he didn't complete it. While it's easy to chalk this up to Leonardo's ADHD tendencies, I think there's a little bit too much at play to say definitively what made him quit. Perhaps it was the fact that he created a scene unlike any other, and the thought of perfecting it was too overwhelming, which I can relate to. I often find myself wanting to quit a project before I, ruin it, leaving it in the shop forever,
Sure.
I think I write this in one of my email letters with the business, where I was like, I love when a project is so high in potential but is unfinished. That's when I love to leave projects and like not ever touch them again, because I'm like, I can't mess it up. It's already like, it has the potential to be perfect, I've
had that a few times in the writing process where I'll be researching one of my subjects. Like it happened with Ian Fleming, where I was getting very close to the end of Ian Fleming, and I was like, I kind of don't want to finish this because I'm going to be sad when it's done. And it's
then it's in concrete.
Right. Like
you can't touch it again.
Exactly. So I think I get it.
That's how I feel whenever I'm reading the scripts too. Another option for why he didn't finish it could have been due to finances, since he was forced to pay for the materials out of pocket, or boredom, or maybe depression. We don't really know. Either way, it would never be completed. And Leonardo would never get paid what was laid out in the contract, which, by the way, was his own land worth several $100,000, which he could sell back to the monastery for cash if he wanted to.
Jeez.
Yeah. Instead, all he got was a bundle of firewood and a notice that he had to pay back the wine that he took out on credit.
This is because he didn't finish.
Yeah. They were like, we were going to pay you a whole property, but instead, here's some firewood because we feel bad for you. And also, you owe us a bottle of wine.
So funny, but I guess if I was to give a positive spin, I would say he's more concerned with his art than his possessions, and that's neat.
Yes. Yeah, he was. That's the thing I like about Leonardo, is like that stream of consciousness, hop from one interesting thing to the other that like kids do, never left him, even when he was, old and decrepit. Despite this, the adoration would continue on in the memories of artists around him. After failing to finish it, Leonardo gave the painting to Ginevra's brother to look after it, and it became a centerpiece of the Vinci family. Leonardo's scene was a massive influence to Florentine painters, inspiring them to paint chaotic and dramatic crowd scenes, which would eventually become popular in the Baroque area, such as Caravaggio and Rembrandt.
Oh, two of my all-time favorites. Mm-hmm. Two of my all-time favorites.
Yeah, if you ever looked up on Reddit, accidental Baroque, have you ever seen those pictures?
No. Yes, I think I have, actually.
Yeah, it's like scenes at sports stadiums where a hot dog is flying through the air and everybody's dramatically trying to grab it or something like that.
Yes.
That's if you're just listening to this in the car, that's kind of the vibe that I get from Adoration of the Magi, is very Baroque drama painting.
And for anybody that's not familiar with Caravaggio, I would highly recommend looking up his work. He was known for freezing a moment in time that blink and you miss it. That was kind of his style. So a lot of it was somebody tripped and a bucket is falling through the air towards the ground, and somebody is looking on, with their hand outreach saying, oh, they're trying to grab it or whatever. It's these freeze frames of, you can tell they're not posed there. I mean, maybe they were to an extent, but they were meant to feel very instant. It was just a moment in time that he was freezing and capturing it, and they're very beautiful. And he's also just one of the most intensely realistic painters I've ever seen, Caravaggio.
Yeah, and I think that was Leonardo's concept too, was let's not do a posed for the portrait type of thing. Let's do okay, the Son of God was just born in a manger, and now there are 3 kings showing up to your shepherd's village. Everyone is freaking out.
Yeah.
That is kind of the idea that I think Leonardo was going with, which is why you see so much chaos.
It's cool.
A little interesting thing, I'm not sure if I add this, but in the Adoration of the Magi, in the bottom right corner, we can actually see a self-portrait of Leonardo. In a lot of the paintings at the time, there would be somebody who would look away from the painting, like scene. Yep, that's the one.
Oh.
Botticelli, Donatello, all those guys would have one person looking outside of the frame of the painting to try to make it look a little bit more real, like you were taking a snapshot of the world.
Gotcha. Like a band photo.
Yes, exactly. And
one person just doesn't care they're even there, man. They're just looking away.
Yeah, in like a turtleneck, and it's like, sepia filter.
Yeah. One is looking directly at the camera because the lead singer usually.
Yeah.
Once, and then it's like the drummer is kind of like.
I don't even care that
looking,
I'm here.
Yeah, he's just looking off like to the side or whatever. And then there's one who really doesn't care. They're looking way away.
That's the bassist, I think.
That's probably the bassist.
Yeah. Now, Leonardo at this point, since he, like I said, was in debt for wine and got sticks for the Adoration of the Magi, was kind of at the end of his rope. Da Vinci was getting closer to his 30s, and he felt that he was full of potential, but completely lacking in results and recognition, which... #relatable.
You're 24. Sit down.
Okay, fine. Now, while Leonardo was still in favor with the Medici due to his portrait work and his long-standing success doing music and theater in town, he felt his painting career had kind of come to an end. Peers like Botticelli, although not as visionary as Leonardo, were capable of actually finishing work, something that he had failed to do time and time again. This led to some bitterness between the two. In one of Da Vinci's notes on Botticelli's version of the Annunciation, he writes, quote, "I just saw an Annunciation in which the angel looked like she wished to chase Our Lady out of the room with such violent movement that she might be a hated enemy. And Our Lady seemed in such despair that she was about to throw herself out a window."
So dramatic.
Yeah. Despite the sassy remark being kind of true with the Botticelli painting, Leonardo would still return to Botticelli's work often to take notes of it. So he was like, I hate this guy. Well, what did he do with that wing over there? Yeah, I think, okay, yeah, let's add that one. That type of thing. Also relatable.
I could totally see that.
Yeah.
It reminds me of certain musical artists that I can't quite put my finger on right now, but it's like there's certain ones like, oh, I hate Post Malone. I hate that guy.
Why?
But I love him. I don't know why.
Oh, yes.
I can't figure it out. It's one of those where I have zero against him. He doesn't do anything bad. He seems like a really good guy.
You know who's one for me?
But there's something about him that I just like, oh, I don't like this guy. But I still do like him, you know?
The one for me is Bruno Mars. I don't like any Bruno Mars song. But how come when it turns on the radio, I know all the words?
See, I don't know enough Bruno Mars songs, but I know exactly what you're talking about. Yes. Where it's like I never really liked him, and then I watched him do the halftime show a couple years back, whatever it was, and I was like, damn, this guy's kind of rad.
Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah, that was like the Leonardo Botticelli thing, where like Botticelli was like, "Here, let me show you some of my work," and Da Vinci was like, "Looks like shit." But also, you get paid, so I should probably take some notes.
Right, and I also kind of like what you do, too. I hate it, but it's good.
Yeah, and like if you look up Botticelli's Annunciation versus Da Vinci's, Botticelli's is way better. But if you look up Botticelli's Adoration of the Magi, way more stiff, way less dynamic than what Da Vinci was shooting for. Now, while he turned to pen and paper to sketch a way out of his current mess, gears were in motion in the Palazzo Medici that would change his life. So to pan out a little bit, Lorenzo Medici, known by many as Lorenzo the Magnificent, was considered the handsome Kennedy of his time. A debonair, upper-crust leader, Lorenzo had been trained in humanist philosophy, Latin, fencing, and falconry, and most especially poetry. By the time of Leonardo's Adoration, he would have been 29 years old and had successfully made Florence the wealthiest, most influential city in Italy, overshadowing not only his banking rivals, but the reign of the Catholic Church.
Interesting.
So as a result of this, on April 26, 1478, during Sunday Mass, a coup known as the Pazzi Conspiracy would occur.
The Pazzi Conspiracy.
The Pazzi Conspiracy.
You got to do it with the chef's kiss hand. The Pazzi.
Yeah, we're doing it right now for people who aren't watching us, which is everyone. Anyway, that morning, an assassin stabbed Lorenzo's brother on holy ground 18 times.
Oh!
Lorenzo, however, leapt to defend himself, only sustaining a minor cut across his throat.
Oh. Just across his throat is all.
Yeah, but it didn't get into the veins, so he was good. His brother was very thoroughly dead, with the whole 18 stabs in church during Sunday Mass.
Oh my gosh.
Now, the Pazzi conspiracy was a group effort by its namesake, the Pazzi family, and several of Lorenzo's enemies, most notably the Catholic Church. The Pazzi banking clan had had their glory days around 30 years ago, before the Medicis took control of Florence, and after living in their shadow, reached out to the enemy of their enemy, none other than the Pope himself.
Ooh.
Pope Sixtus IV hated the Medici for thwarting their plans of rule across northern Italy. So the Pazzi believed they could make an alliance. The family begged for Catholic support, but Sixtus stated that he could not order a man's death since it was a sin.
Sixtus?
Sixtus.
Sixtus.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like a Mad Max character.
Doesn't it?
Right? Like, Sixtus, get him.
Yeah, so he's like, I can't kill a guy. He did mention, however, that sins could be forgiven.
And there's the loophole.
Yes, especially if it was the sin of killing the Medici brothers. He's like, I can't kill that guy, but like, murder happens.
And I can forgive you. That's the cool thing about God. He's groovy about that.
Murder of like, I don't know, just spitballing here, Giuliano and Lorenzo Medici.
Just saying.
That would be fine. Now, unfortunately for the conspirators, they were unsuccessful in killing the bolder, more beloved brother, and the assassination put the people of Florence squarely in Lorenzo's favor. So it was a total failure. If anything, everybody was like Lorenzo fans from here on out.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And now, while Lorenzo was a good tactician, he believed that most wars were won in courts, not in battlefields, which I think is fairly true. And he elected to send 3 delegations of Florentine bankers, artists, and scholars across Italy to put out the political fires that had been set. Sort of the wolves were circling at this point, and he was like, I need to control the situation.
It also feels very House Lannister.
Yes.
You
He's
know what
like,
I mean?
I'm going to send out my people. He who has
the gold is going to win the war, not the war itself, you know?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So in Venice, Verrocchio would be sent out to put out political fires. Botticelli would be sent to Pope Sixtus, and Leonardo da Vinci would be sent with a troupe of performers and bankers to entertain Milan, a sprawling city with a very different climate than Florence. So if you remember from, the previous episode, Florence, as we know, was governed by a unique sort of draw of a hat leadership backed by
that's right.
The banking clan / mafia that pulled the strings behind the scenes. Milan, however, was far bloodier. Republics of any kind were unheard of in Milan, having been ruled 200 years by a successful line of dukes, now from the Sforza family. If you remember from episode 1, Galeazzo Sforza, the one Verrocchio's bottega serviced, had been assassinated shortly after his visit to Florence.
Okay.
Luckily, Galeazzo had already written on paper that his younger brother, Ludovico Sforza, was to be the next in line. The only problem with this is that Ludovico had been semi-banished to France by his brother to, quote, see the world during Galeazzo's death. Much like Game of Thrones, this led for Galeazzo's contract to be ripped up by the Milanese court, with his wife taking over as queen regent for her 7-year-old son, Jean. So we're thinking, once again, House Lannister, queen regent type of situation. And like watching Stannis Baratheon return to King's Landing, Ludovico Sforza called upon his allies to lay siege on the towns surrounding Milan until his sister-in-law was forced to give up her regency, leaving Lorenzo's nephew in his care. Shortly after Ludovico's regency began, his nephew, who would have had the right of succession, died.
I know this sounds strange, but it's weird to think of anywhere in Italy being under siege. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think of like England and the Scots and stuff and their castles. I just don't think of like Milan being laid siege to. It's really funny because I would totally attest that to like Hollywood. Yeah, 100%.
Because if you went to medieval anywhere, they would be like, what's England? Who the hell are England? They'd be like, oh, that island, that weird little island full of those people who talk like this, Meanwhile, like the largest amount of castles are in like Croatia or something,
where Game of Thrones was filmed.
Yeah.
King's Landing is in Croatia.
Oh, really?
Yeah, if it doesn't know that.
Yeah, so like all of like the big medieval castle.
Jamie, when he went with Jess, they went to Croatia a year or two ago, something like that, and he went and toured the city / fortress that was King's Landing, and he said it was awesome.
That is really cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so like I said, Ludovico basically got the job after starving Milan. And then the successor, who, you know, he was supposed to be like, I'm the regent until you get old enough. The successor died.
Okay.
Right. So his nephew. While it is debated by historians, it is widely accepted by the court of Milan that Ludovico slowly poisoned the boy.
Oh my gosh.
All while adorning him with gifts and trying to encourage his alcoholic tendencies.
Oh my gosh.
He's like, yeah, man, don't worry about Milan. Just go party. Go party. Go party. Go party.
Here's more wine. Don't ask where I got it.
Yeah. Now, skeptics deny that Ludovico had much to do with this, saying that his nephew had chronic stomach problems, and based on their conversations, the two cared for deeply with one another. Chronic stomach problems can also be caused by, funny enough, poison.
Wouldn't you know it?
So I'm not really, I think the debate is out. Either way, his brother's son was out of the way, and Ludovico would have no strong enough, opposition to oppose his rule. Despite this, Ludovico knew that it was more than his legal right to be considered ruler. He also needed to legitimize himself around this court that he basically forced to love him. Right. So despite the insanity that led to Ludovico's succession, Leonardo seemed ecstatic to join the court in Milan. The Medici sent Leonardo first and foremost as a musician and craftsman, making a lyre that was meant to be played like a violin. And it's kind of weird to picture Leonardo as this type of thing.
It's still cool. And I forgot that we talked about the last episode that he was a great musician.
Yeah. So Leonardo carved the entire sort of violin lyre thing out of wood with the body of the instrument carved in the shape of a horse skull, which was then clad in pure silver.
Dude, that is metal.
It's really cool. We have some pictures of it on the website. It's pretty dope.
Ooh. Oh, is that the actual one?
I think that one is a replica. I
still
couldn't confirm whether or not that was the actual one.
Very cool.
Yeah, kind of interesting. So he and his accompanying musical troupe would often play them and then offer them as gifts for the new Duke. If this seems a little left field, keep in mind the lens that we're looking at Leonardo's life through. 600 years later, the only medium that we would have available to us is Leonardo's visual work, such as schematics and paintings. This wouldn't be the case for Leonardo's peers, who had known him to participate in theater and singing just as much as painting. What would be left field would be the way that Leonardo takes advantage of his opportunity to reinvent himself. So Leonardo knew that the Sforzas didn't know much about him or his work. So on a long ride to Milan, he decided that he would make a resume of sorts for his new patron, listing out what he could do. The letter's a bit lengthy, so I won't read all of it out, but to paraphrase, he writes, quote, I can produce war bridges that are light and indestructible by fire or battle. I know how to pump water out of siege trenches. I have designs that can tear down any castle defense, even if it is founded on solid rock and cannons cannot destroy it. I have produced secret designs that will provide you naval superiority or allow you to dig silent, secret tunnels underneath defenses. I will make you unassailable armored chariots that can pierce through the ranks of your foes and catapults that are more effective than cannons. In times of peace, I could be a civic architect unlike any other, designing city structures and waterways. As a sculptor, I can produce the bronze horse statue you've wanted, with your father riding it to immortalize your family glory. Likewise, in painting, I can do everything possible, as well as any other guy who can do it.
Wow. That is so rad. And by those, the war bridges, I think I've seen that. I think they replicated that at, again, the Denver Museum of Art and Science, or Nature and Science, whatever it is. And it was amazing. It's like this, how it all fits together. I can't even describe it. You have to just look it up yourself.
So his whole resume was just like, I can make war machines. And if you're thinking to yourself, Akiva, you never mentioned that Leonardo worked to build siege machines and war machines. You're right, I didn't. That's because he didn't do that. Oh. Leonardo grew up in an artist town. He'd never even seen a war, never mind building tanks or catapults. In fact, Leo was such a softie that he was a vegetarian and would buy animals from pet stores just to set them free.
What a cutie pie.
I know, it's kind of cute. But yeah, he's like, oh yeah, I can make siege engines. And I'm like going back in the book, I'm like, did he ever make siege engines?
So he was kind of BSing, but in his mind, he was like, I know I'm capable of it.
Yes.
I just haven't done it yet.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So he was like, I know that Ludovico Sforza got his job from attacking a bunch of people. So he probably really likes war. So let me make war machines for him. And I'm not going to tell him that I'm a painter because that didn't really work out when I was in Florence. So, we'll keep that on the down low.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Kind of funny. It just like mid-30s crisis, I'm going to reinvent myself type of thing.
It feels very, hold my beer.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's hard to understand what compelled Leonardo to take this approach with Ludovico's patronage. He barely mentions the fact that he's a painter and doesn't even mention the job that he was sent there to do, which is play music. If I were to guess, Leonardo knew that the Sforza family was not only war-minded, but also extravagant. At around this time, Ludovico had spent 150,000 ducats, or ducats, I'm not really sure how that's pronounced.
I think it's ducats.
Ducats? Okay. 150,000 ducats just redecorating and renovating his castle. In today's dollars, that would be close to $21 million.
Oh.
Yeah, if you're accounting for the gold value and all that. Leonardo thought that if he appealed to the Sforza military side, he would avoid having to go into debt on wine and paint again, and he would have a cushy tenure in the ducal court. So, aside from that, Da Vinci had recently been reading about war machines, and it was his special interest. After buying books from inventors like Roger Bacon, along with Roberto Valturio's on the military arts, his notebooks would be flooded with inventions for scythe-wielding chariots, armored carts, and giant ballistas with a bow span of 80 feet across, which we do have photos for if you want to take a look. Relatably, the moment Da Vinci discovered something interesting, he kind of made it his entire personality until the next opportunity came along that was more interesting.
Also, I'm looking at these war machines, and I've seen one or two of these before, but the scythe-wielding chariot is one of the most terrifying things.
I know. Yeah.
It's also just like dangerously close to the horse.
Oh yeah, like it looks like it's about to like lop the horse's neck off.
Completely decapitate it. Yeah.
Yeah, to kind of describe it for the people who are, not looking at the pictures, think like a Roman chariot, but then it has a little bit more reins that go in front of the horse, and then a giant blender helicopter blade is spinning right in front of the horse's face. And then there's like 3 or 4 more helicopter blades coming out of every other side.
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
I think half of it would be psychological. If that thing was running towards me on a battlefield,
I would
just
away.
be like, bye.
Yeah, I would. Yeah. So personally, these designs were some of my favorites as a kid because, it's badass.
It is.
Growing up fascinated with clockwork and spring mechanisms, Leonardo's war machines were the holy grail for me. These designs weren't just a flight of fancy either. Leo's scythe chariot had over 30 preparatory drawings before being submitted to Ludovico. He also made the first design for a tank, which looks kind of like something out of a Studio Ghibli movie. The designs feature a short, cone-shaped hull that looks a bit like a rice hat with cannons sticking out in all directions.
Let's say it. It looks like a flying saucer.
Also, a flying saucer is fair.
It really does. I mean, it's like, to me, immediate when I see it, I'm like, dude, aliens are cruising in this sucker,
True. Inside, one person would operate a crank that allowed it to inch along, while other soldiers would fire from all directions. The fun part about it was if this design was made, it would have actually worked. The hull was angled well to deflect blows, and the mechanism for moving it only needed some minor adjustment to move properly. So, what did his new boss think of Leonardo's application? Well, not much.
Oh.
Yeah, he never gave the green light to any of Da Vinci's badass war machines, seeing that Leonardo had no practical experience, and they looked pretty far-fetched for a Renaissance mind. Nonetheless, Ludovico would have Da Vinci submit some drawings and survey Milan's defenses, and kept him in his back pocket for engineering and architectural work. So, Leo's performances, though, as a musician, had gotten him the favor of his patron's bride-to-be, Beatrice d'Este, who was from another crazy family line that we could do a whole biography on. She was set to be married to Ludovico soon in order to end a family rivalry, and he was doing anything he could to gain her favor. So, when he found out that she loved theater and was a fan of Leonardo, he decided to hire him on for something a bit different. Instead of becoming a decorated war engineer, Leonardo would take a slight pay cut and become Milan's premier set designer.
Ooh.
Yeah, so kind of a weird thing where it's like, I can make war machines. And they're like, go to Broadway, you know?
Like much of the Broadway artists we know and love today. If I'm not mistaken, Lin-Manuel Miranda was actually a gun designer. No, I'm kidding.
No, I was like, what the fuck?
No way. No.
I made a pistol that can shoot. No, I'm not going to do an impression.
He was in a rap group prior to it.
Really?
It was called, it was like Super Sunshine Light Supreme. It's something
so
weird
funny.
like that. It's this, yeah.
I saw this meme recently where it was like, if you took any MF Doom rap and then sang it like Lin-Manuel Miranda, it immediately becomes lame. And likewise, if you take Lin-Manuel Miranda play and then rap it like MF Doom, it sounds awesome. Which I thought was kind of funny.
We've talked about this, but I don't think I've ever knowingly listened to an MF Doom song.
Okay, we got to get into that.
I know.
He's one of those guys, you listen to
me.
him the first time, you're like, what the hell am I listening to? And then you listen to it a couple more times, you're like, okay, this is fire.
People tell me that it's great, so yeah.
Okay, so with a court full of birthdays, religious holidays, and visits from allies, there seemed to be cause for celebration all the time. And Leonardo was tasked with designing the stage for a variety of plays and musicals. While it wasn't what he set out to do, this was right up his alley, so he didn't protest. What he might not have known was that this would be a massive undertaking that would take up nearly a decade of his life. If you ever worked in theater, you'll know that there is no room for people who can't stay on task. So Leonardo was forced to work in a setting that demanded results.
Oh, he couldn't not complete something.
Yes. And that is where we're going to pick up for part 3 of Leonardo da Vinci.
You're giving me the cliffhangers, man.
Yeah.
I never even knew that Leonardo da Vinci was in theater to any capacity, apart from what you mentioned in the last episode, him being fascinated by the apparatuses that made people fly. The pulley systems and everything like that.
No, he was a total theater geek. He loved plays and shows and did awesome freestyles on the lyre and he'd write like funny, raunchy songs to go with it. But like he never wrote any of them down, so we just don't know. It's kind of like what I said, you have to look through the lens. His peers would have been like, oh, Da Vinci, the guy who like is a painter, but he also sings, whereas we're just like Da Vinci, the painter. Seriously,
the more that you teach me about Leonardo da Vinci, the more that I go, I am convinced now that the term Renaissance man came from Leonardo da Vinci almost exclusively.
Yes.
Because I cannot imagine there being another character around that time that did so many different things.
Not as well. I had a couple of friends later on who had a sort of a similar situation where they're like, I'm an artist, I'm an architect, I do music and poems, but like...
I'm a scientist. I discovered rules of physics that I didn't know that I was going to, discover.
Yeah.
I am also in theater. I also play music. I build musical instruments.
Yeah.
It feels
I did
like
an
the
entire
list
book
goes on.
dissecting horses.
It's insane.
Random, totally left field shit. But yeah, this episode, totally crazy. It was also really interesting seeing the reveal of Leonardo's personal life, which he kept to himself.
Sure.
Maybe not because it was a sore spot, but just because it wasn't something that concerned him in his daily life.
Sure.
And then Ginevra's painting, which, like I said, first look, I'm not sure if I would have really thought about it that much. But after learning the context, I feel like it is what I would call Leonardo's psychological paintings.
Sure.
Which is like not just, this is a lady and she's in a garden. It's like, this is a person's life,
totally.
but in a painting. I think that's kind of interesting.
Well, once again, my friend, knocked it out of the park. Loved it. Hope you all enjoyed as well as the listeners out there. We'll wrap it up here, but like always, we'll give a couple of social media shout outs and whatnot. So remember, check us out wherever you can, wherever you listen to podcasts. We're on Apple Podcasts, we're on Spotify, we're on YouTube Music, we're on iHeartRadio. Anywhere that you can give us a like or a review or anything like that, obviously we would appreciate it very much. It helps us in our rankings and everything like that. We're also on TikTok. We're also going to be on Instagram. We also have a Patreon at The Biographers. If anybody is kind enough to support the show here, really any contributions are going to help because right now it's all pro bono.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just basically have to call in sick on myself and then catch up with my writing. So
yeah, and this is a labor of love, and it is quite a bit of labor. If y'all can't tell, all of these are scripted and we do have to research and write all of it ourselves. So again, any support that you can give us would be very much appreciated. Anything else?
I would say check out Metalwork by Miola if you're interested in some hand-forged chef knives. And if you use the code BIOGRAPHERS, you get 10% off any order.
Good call. We've talked about this often throughout our past 6, 7, some odd 8 episodes. The full-time job that Akiva has is a bladesmith, and he's a very, very talented one. And so, again, go check out his website, Metalwork by Meola, MEOLA.com. And again, that code is Biographers. You can get 10% off your order. But I think that's pretty much it for right now. If I think of anything else, I'll maybe add it in later or something. But I think that's usually where we're going to end it.
One more thing.
Sure.
If you are interested in any of the images that we were talking about, obviously you can Google them. But we do have a complete list that we're going to try to put in chronological order for each episode. That's going to be on our website and then on our Instagram. Perfect. So if you're interested in anything that we talked about in episode 2, we'll have pictures of the tanks and the scythe-wielding chariots and Leonardo da Vinci and the Adoration. That's all going to be on our socials. We'll also be adding a couple what I call graveyard stories. Danielle and I were talking about a couple stories that didn't make it into the podcast that are going to be put into short form on our Instagram.
Perfect.
So,
and I'm sure TikTok as well. So yeah, go check out those pictures. They're going to be thebiographerspodcast.com. You can find it there. Any questions, comments, or corrections, you can also send us an email at thebiographerspodcast@gmail.com. Beyond that, though, hope you're all having a great week and enjoying the show so far. And like always, remember, ignorance is not stupidity. It is the absence of knowledge. And I hope you all learned something today.
See ya.
Bye.
You've been listening to The Biographers. For more information, please visit thebiographerspodcast.com.